Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Nursing Uncharted, the podcast that introduces nurses to all different types of nursing, all different ways that we can use this license. Thank you so much for listening today. We have a great episode today. It's a conversation that we've wanted to have for a long time, so I'm really excited. Really interested in this topic. It's a realm of nursing that all of us are aware of, that we work with, all the time and have some sort of understanding about, but maybe not a deep understanding. And that is nurse management. So we know, we work with nurse management, but we may have never delved deeper into what it takes, or maybe you've mulled the idea over about management, but you're not sure if it's right for you, or maybe you just kind of want a better understanding of the role to give some perspective to your own unit. So here to give us some perspective on nurse management is Katie English. Katie is currently a clinical nurse manager in a pediatric cardiac ICU. She first came to love peds and nursing as a CNA, and then started as a new grad in a CICU and never looked back. While working bedside, Katie often served as preceptor, which is where her passion for mentorship really started developing. She also worked as a clinical instructor for a period of time too. Katie loves to spend time outdoors or exploring new restaurants with friends or family. Katie, thank you for coming to talk to us about nurse management. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Maggie. I am so excited to be here. And I know, as you said, it's been a while. We've been looking forward to this conversation for a while.
Yes.
So I'm grateful to be here with you today.
Yeah. So I met Katie at NTI, the critical care conference, back in May. So, we've really wanted to get on this since May. So I'm so happy to have you here today.
Yes.
So I kind of want to just jump in a little bit about you and what really made you wanted to get into management, and how long have you been in management so far?
Yeah, happy to share. So, as you mentioned at the beginning, I started, working bedside in a CICU and was loving that, was, precepting and really growing in my practice there. And then had the opportunity, an interim manager position. And I know they're called different things at different places. So it's kind of like a frontline manager position became available in an interim capacity. And it was something that I was just curious about. And so I wanted to see a little bit more hands-on what it was. It was kind of nice that it was interim. So I felt like I could try it on. And if I didn't like it, could step out of it and take it that way. I also was nights and working nights, and it was for the night shift position. And I felt there weren't really other folks stepping forward. And so I really wanted to make sure that whoever was in that role knew our night culture, knew the challenges that we were facing as a night team. And so I felt really strongly that we kind of needed one of our own to do that. And so I said, well, I guess it could be me.
Yeah.
So I stepped in that way. And then as the interim period wrapped up, there was some movement on the team. So there was an opportunity for me to stay. And so I decided that I was liking it and still learning a lot, and being kind of challenged in different ways. So I stayed and have been working as a manager in a couple of different capacities ever since. So that was about 3 years ago.
Okay.
And so still learning a lot and still here doing it.
Yeah. How was it moving from as a bedside nurse position to, and working alongside your coworkers, to now having this, additional, authoritative, I guess, presence? Did that make it easy, or did it make it, more difficult? What was that like for you?
Sure. That's a great question. A couple of things that come to mind. One is that I became a nurse because I love taking care of patients. And so there was that challenge for me. Kind of, as I mentioned, it wasn't that I was necessarily I set out to be a nurse manager, right? I was still loving patient care and still doing that, and had, in honesty, some conflicting feelings about, am I ready to leave bedside? Do I want to leave bedside? This is really what I had set out to do. And now I'm stepping away from that. And so there were some, thoughtful conversations about that. And then to your point also of then becoming a formal leader to my group of peers, which can be a challenging transition, I think it's all about authenticity. You know, I think I like to think that I was a great member of the team. I had the confidence and the trust of the people that I worked with. And so I was able to carry that through with me into that leadership role. But it can be a tough transition, and depending, I mean, every unit has its own dynamics. And so I think part of my coming to leadership was kind of through those good intentions, like I said, really wanting to advocate for my team. And I think that was well felt. But depending on other people's situations, it's definitely something to be aware of, because it can be a tricky thing depending on what conversations come up.
Yeah, we have just in my work environment, we also have interim managers too, and it's a good. I think as a floor nurse, it's a nice thing to see when you see somebody like we have Clin 4s. I don't know how it works over, clinical ladder. Somebody that's higher up that, assumes that role, you kind of are like, okay, that makes sense, and instead of having somebody like maybe from another unit or something come on, I think that it does give people a little bit of peace knowing that they know the population, they know the nurses, they work alongside us, and they, we're just at the bedside, so they know like exactly what we are going through. And, I think that piece probably really helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you want the people that you work with, whether, it's your leadership team or someone alongside you, you want to know that they know you and they understand what you're going through, and they know the challenges that you're facing. One, just to provide that kind of in the moment support, and also to provide that advocacy, right? And being able to speak to really the specifics and problem solve in a really more meaningful way. Yeah.
So you've been doing this for about 3 years now. And is it different environments? So like you started in the cardiac and now you're in peds.
Yeah. So I've always been in peds. I've spent some time in one cardiac ICU, and then I did spend some time in primary care, which was a really great learning opportunity. And then I had the opportunity to go back into a CICU. So have seen a couple of different environments that way.
Gotcha. I mean, the last 3 years have been really hard for all of us, I can't imagine, how was that like, transitioning into that role in a really difficult time? Tell me what that was like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was in the interim role, kind of pre-COVID, and then fairly quickly, COVID was the world that we were living in. So it was a really, as you said, really complex, challenging time for all of us. It was a really interesting time to be a novice leader as you're trying to navigate some completely uncharted territory. So, in some ways I didn't know much of anything else. So there was something maybe good about that. I mean, of course, from the bedside perspective, I knew how things were changing, but, it was such a, we have to address these things as they're coming up, in the moment, and like problem solve for the time in front of us. So it was a pretty quick, drinking from a fire hose, I think is what a lot of people say, right? And that's how it felt for sure. But in some ways it still feels that way. Like in some ways, I don't know that if I had become a leader at a different time, if that would have changed, or if it just maybe the, the momentousness of it would have felt maybe different, because it wasn't in this experience of a pandemic. But I do think there probably would have been some of that regardless. So
yeah, I'm sure it probably served you well a little bit to have just kind of jumped into that role and like have that kind of momentum and motivation, and then you get hit with this big wave and you're like, okay, we're gonna keep going.
We're gonna figure this out.
Yeah. And I'm sure it does give, just knowing the patient population and the nurses there, it probably gave them a lot of solace too, to be like, all of these things are changing, but we have this one constant that knows, what's going on. It was the nurse manager position, correct? Not the assistant manager?
Correct. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Have you learned in the last few years, have you changed your style of management at all? Or do you feel like there are different styles of management and there's one that's worked better than
That's a really
others?
great question. That's a really good question. There absolutely are different styles, right? I think you can look at your own leadership team and see, and hopefully, for good or for, see some diversity in the styles, because there's obviously benefits to all of them in different capacities and in different ways. But I think we say this a lot, but nursing and healthcare in general is such a team sport. And I think I really, not to take that analogy too far, but really view my role as that of coach. I think there's a lot of different kinds of coaching that happens at the leadership level, looking at educators or practice specialists or whoever. But I think that is also true for the manager role. And I think really, as I had mentioned, for me, it was an opportunity to continue to drive patient care forward through kind of that mentoring and coaching mentality and view that I had first seen really as a preceptor. And then taking it to the next level where I'm also engaged in hiring people and again, having some more of those crucial conversations, but with the focus of let's coach us all to be better and how can we continue to grow. So that's how I approach it. And I think, that growth mindset and that mentality is really what helps me be successful.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, the focus now is not just, your patient is really the unit as a whole, and like how it's functioning as a whole, and bringing in good people and just, managing other people. I mean, that's the whole rigmarole.
Yeah, exactly. Rigmarole. Exactly. So, but I think there's, as to your point, there's different, you try to tap into different, different pieces of yourself, right? Because if I'm in a finance meeting, the advocacy in that space looks like one thing. Whereas if I'm talking to a new team member, that, that kind of advocating for them and their growth looks different. So,
yeah. Yeah. Speaking of, tapping into different parts of yourself to assume different roles. I mean, you have, your primary responsibilities as a nurse manager. Do you feel like you wear a lot of hats, or do you feel like it's just one hat that has a lot of, different purposes? Or
that's a
like
good question.
How is your role defined? Do you feel like,
Yeah. Well, it's so many things, honestly, but I think that's an interesting way to think about it, right? Is it this one big hat or all these, different?
Is it a 10-gallon hat?
Yeah.
Or is it most different hats?
Exactly. I think in some ways it does feel like a 10-gallon hat. I kind of like that. I think, there's just so many pieces that do roll up, and I'm, different organizations, it may look different to different places, but I think, I'm someone who, and I think a lot of leaders have a lot of, hopefully you have a lot of interests, right? And so as the manager, I get to plug into all of them, which is a good and a bad thing, right? So I like that I'm able to be involved in the quality work. I get to help partner with our education specialist on different education opportunities and precepting and all of those things. I'm also, as I mentioned, in finance meetings and talking about those things. I'm talking about staffing and hiring. So it's really pretty all encompassing. I can't, I'm trying to think of what's an area that and my engagement might look like, different levels at different times, depending on what the need is or what's going on. But there isn't necessarily a corner of it that I don't interact with, which I do like. I mean, it's, it's always interesting. It's always new. There's great opportunity to have an impact, which I think is also really powerful and one of the great things, but it can also be a lot.
Yeah. So. Well, yeah. 'Cause you are, and like you said, you have different engagement for different, based on what the priorities of the unit are and what you need. You have your hands in a variety of different things, but delving in probably, you have to prioritize your time.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Like, what is that? I mean, how Are you able to delegate things, or do you feel like a lot of things fall on you to do?
That's a great question. A little bit of both and probably. So I think that it's impossible to do everything, and working on delegating is critical. And I think that that's a hard skill, I think. And I don't know if that's, me as a nurse, or me as Katie, or,
me.
Yeah, exactly.
Me too.
In that it's, you want to get all those things done. You want to be able to do it to the best of, your ability, and really owning all of that. And like I said, realizing that I'm one person. And so really trying to partner with either other members of the leadership team, or as you mentioned, other leaders such as like Clin 4s or Clin 3s, even, Clin 2, like no one's, if there's someone who has a passion, I think that's part of the coaching piece too, is how can we work together? Not that it's but is this something that you're interested in? Is this something that you want to be involved in? And how can I help support that? Because ultimately, going back to this idea of like diversity of styles and ideas, the more people we can get involved, the better. I certainly don't have all the ideas, and I quite frankly don't want to, right? Like, how can we all partner together? But delegating is hard. There's so many asks, and I also want to be, a great support and drive things forward for the team. So juggling all of that. Yeah.
And I'm sure it's a hard time to have the resources to delegate too, because you also need, a time with frequent rotation and nurses coming in and out, and, figuring out what they want to do. You have new people coming in, and older people, going on to the next thing. And so I'm sure it's hard to sometimes find those people.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, and making sure it's something that's, can help fill their bucket too, you know, and trying to approach it from that angle. So,
yeah, I'm sure there are situations where you're like, okay, this needs to be done, but do I have somebody to do it? And there's too much on this person's plate? What's a long-term goal? What's a short-term goal?
Exactly. And considering all those things. And then, is it something that I just need to own, or, what else can we restructure? And to your point, I think, coming out of COVID, in some ways, some of what we lost is during that time was the ability to be involved in different projects and things that I think, at least for me as a bedside nurse, it was great to have that diversity in my day, and to be able to be involved in some different things. So trying to get back to that. And again, in that way, that's like supportive.
Yeah. We're seeing that too, where it's like, okay, we let these committees kind of fall to the wayside in order to make space for all things COVID. And now it's like time to like try to expand again, and like, okay, what can we do to like build those committees back up again? And how can we like really expand on our units, and, get back? How do we get back?
Exactly.
What it was like before.
I know. And like, what are the things that we wanted to bring back right away? And then what are those things that actually like rest in peace? Like, better
off.
Yeah, exactly. Or like, let's do that different because there was opportunity. So,
yeah, I'm sure. I mean, there are so many things that COVID kind of enlightened and probably highlighted, and then, but there was a lot of problem solving that went involved that took place over the last 2 years. I think it really showed us how well we can think on our feet.
Totally.
Coming up with policies. And
I know. I will never forget what email felt like in those couple of, those early weeks. I mean, it's still, but it was, that was, unbelievable. So
it was just constant change.
Yes. So
I have a folder that I would put all my COVID updates like in this folder.
Yeah, same.
It was like once a week. And so it became a tracker for how long COVID had been going on for me, because I had 52 emails, this like weekly thing. Like, okay, COVID's been going on for a year. And now I have like 150 like in there.
And you're just like, sad face. It's awful.
I know.
Yeah.
Now it kind of is more like a, this is what's going on with the hospital, but not as much COVID, which, good thing. Are you guys seeing a lot out where you are?
No, I have to say, we continue the pediatric numbers were just not what they had been for the adult world. I will say we're seeing some other viral stuff now that school's in session and things. We're really seeing some high numbers and really preparing for the upcoming respiratory season, whether it's, whatever it may, all the number of things that it could be. But that's kind of what we're focusing on right now.
We'll be right back to our interview. Grab a cup of coffee, but don't go anywhere because we want to talk to you about our podcast partner, American Mobile. No matter your specialty, American Mobile has endless travel nursing opportunities. With the largest clinical team of all staffing agencies, American Mobile is ready to support you in achieving your career goals. To learn more about the benefits of American Mobile, like higher earning potential, premium health coverage, and 401k matching, make sure to visit AmericanMobile.com to speak with a recruiter. Again, visit AmericanMobile.com to discover your next travel nursing adventure. Now, back to the show. I want to kind of walk through your day. Can you map out your day for me, start to finish? I mean, so we get an idea of what you do focus on. Because a lot of times we see, as floor nurses, we see the nurse manager in the morning kind of do their rounds and check in on everybody. And then, for the rest of the day, you're in meetings or, so map out your day for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a lot of, for better, for worse, how, kind of the way it goes. And every day, of course, every day is different. But certainly there's a general structure, right? I think for myself, a typical day would include coming in. We do some morning huddles with our team in terms of who's coming in, who's going out, where the sticky spots might be, and just try to problem solve for those early on in the day. Do a lap, kind of, as you said, check in and see that everything's getting off to a good start. And then it does, I think, quickly become kind of meeting focused. And that could be either more unit-based projects or opportunities or initiatives that are happening. It could be system-based things such as, looking at staffing as the organization or different other projects, things like that. And then we will, so it's really that managing email is a whole nother piece that I am still trying to figure out, of keeping track of all the things that are coming in and trying to get everyone plugged into the resources and answers, that they need. I try to do an afternoon, rounding in the unit, is a little bit more of my intentional rounding time, where as people are, either making sure there's good lunch coverage, or that's usually when the chaos of the morning has simmered a bit. Yeah. So people are more available if I can sit down and chat and actually have more meaningful conversations with people about what's going on or what they need, in their room and things like that. So yeah, I know I hate to say that it's just a lot of meetings, but I don't think that perception is totally wrong. I think there is a lot of time that's spent in that collaboration and advocacy.
Yeah. Well, when you're overseeing so many things, that just makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. But certainly I check in with our charge nurses a ton just to see, how things are going, how the day is moving, how does the night look, those pieces. Some days that means coming in early or staying late, trying to consistently get some time with night shift and still balancing the asks that happen during the day, and all those things.
What are your normal hours look like?
Yeah. I will typically try to arrive sometime between 8 and 9 is usually like a typical, and then I'll be here until usually 5 or 6. But again, if I'm really wanting to, I try to see night shift at least once a week. And so, which is always room for improvement. I even feel bad that it's only once a week, but it can be a tough thing to balance. So coming in then around, 5 or 6 or staying until 10 or 11 to get some of that time with night shift and make sure I'm checking in with them and have an opportunity to hear
what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk a lot about work-life balance on here, with all different, it's just ever present in nursing, and, that doesn't sleep for nurse managers either. I'm sure you probably get, you have to take work home with you more so, I think, in some circumstances than shift work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's different, right? Like I certainly, as a bedside nurse, would go to sleep, thinking like, okay, what did I forget? And, you wake up and you're like, oh gosh, like, did I do that thing? Or how's that patient doing? Like certainly would have those things. But I have found it's different because it's not, directly related to how's my patient doing. It's a little bit more, how's the team doing? And I certainly take that home with me a lot, especially I think in our current times. I mean, this weekend, making sure people have what they need. What can I do to support? In the evenings, people will certainly reach out as I want them to help troubleshoot different things that come up. So the work-life balance piece can be a challenge.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Yeah. What do you feel like helps in those situations? Like help that work-life balance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one piece that is helpful for me is kind of sharing, like identifying a person on call and kind of sharing that amongst our leadership team.
Okay.
I will always be, unless I'm like on PTO or something where it's like I'm really unavailable, could certainly always be second call if I'm not first, but it is helpful to have some of that first call responsibility shared, just so then I can create a little bit of that distance. I'm a big proponent in like, you got to put your own oxygen mask on first, and I say that to our team. I really think we all need to take that to heart, but it can be really hard.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. We just actually finished 2 series on nurse resilience. And that was one of the biggest things is, we as nurses are, geared towards taking care of others. And it's really hard to kind of shift the focus on ourselves and make sure that we're being taken care of. But that's where burnout happens, is when, you have so much time and effort going into other people and then you leave nothing for yourself. And so, I mean, making sure that you're taken care of and that you're filling your own cup. I mean, that ultimately ends up you to give better patient care. You are more of a team,
Totally.
It's that's for everybody all the way up the chain.
Exactly. I know it's, if if I spent all weekend thinking about staffing and worried about staffing, and then I come in, Monday morning and I'm, thinking about these other issues or things that we're challenged by, it's harder to bring my creativity and my full empathy to those situations. Right. And I think it's, like you said, it's true for every single one of us. So,
yeah. When you see for me, I am also terrible. I'm terrible at delegating. I'm not good at it at all. I need to be better at it. But I think if I was in a management position and I saw the unit really short, I think it would be really hard for me to not try to get in there and do like little tasks and things, because I'm sure you have to kind of take a step back and be like, I can't be there in that way because I have to be like the overseeing role. Does that ring true for you?
It rings so true. And it's so hard because, again, like I loved being bedside, right? Yeah. So like and I'm such a, like, I'm an extrovert. I'm a social bug. Like if I sit in my office for too long, I'm like, all right, I got to get out and see like, where are the people at? Let me go check in and how's everyone doing? And so for me, for sure, I think, if things are busy, I love being out on the unit and I love helping out and I love listening for lunches and doing all those things. And then it's just finding that balance, because it can be so hard too, right? Because if I have deadlines I have to respond to that directly relate to needs of the unit, I need to also pay attention to those things. And so I, want to do it all. And sometimes you can't, and it's just those are challenging days, of course.
Yeah. You just have to learn. It's just a learning process of figuring out where, where your role really lands, I guess.
Yeah. And that prioritization looks different on different days. Right. And so I think there's, trying to honor that. But again, I just, if we could just all duplicate ourselves, it'd be fine.
Right. Yeah. Just an extra, somebody to do charge and somebody to precept, and I know.
Yeah.
Can you highlight some of your favorite parts of nurse management? Some of your favorite parts of the job?
Yeah. Yeah. As I said, I love, I became a nurse because of patients and patient care. And so I love, being able to influence that and help support that, even though I'm not happy, I'm not at that intersection of care delivery. But again, I really see that through support and mentorship of nurses, and making sure that our team has the tools and resources they need to be the best and most successful that they can be. So I think the highlights for me are just connecting with people and being able to set them up for success. And that can look like different things for different people. Right. So, one day that might be, hands-on in the room. And one day that might be having like a great conversation and coaching them to the next thing, or creating opportunities, to drive work forward. I can think of like one nurse, for example, is really excited about spearheading a new resiliency initiative in the unit. And so how do I help? Yeah, exactly. And so how do I help get some resources, plugged into that and those kinds of things. So that's what I really love, is like those human connections and making all that possible, which is great.
I'm sure it's really satisfying to see, those kind of accomplishments, or to like kind of be able to look at the horizon and look what could be possible for the
exactly unit. I love how you say that, because I do think as we continue to emerge from this kind of COVID situation, right, of looking at that horizon, I totally feel that way about it, of like, okay, this is where we're going, and I know we're not quite there yet, but how do we keep step by step making our way over to there, so
What we talked a little bit about this, but just on the flip side, what are some of the most difficult parts of the job, you think? I know we kind of talked about delegating and things, but where have you felt like, the biggest challenges lie?
Yeah, I think defining what a successful day looks like is just so hard. So, when I was bedside, I had my, brain, or your sheet, or whatever you called it. And I just loved crossing off like labs, done. X-ray, done. Right. Bath and linen, done. And that does not exist for me anymore.
It's all task oriented, you can complete tasks.
Exactly. So and of course, nursing is so much more than just those tasks, right? But like that, there was such as a list maker, there was such satisfaction in being able to do that, and, getting your patient all tucked in and being like, okay, and not every shift looked that way, but it felt really good when it did. Yeah. And that is does not exist. I should say, I haven't found out how to do that yet. If anybody knows, please let me know, because I would love to hear. But that's the hard part of just, so how do I, trying to figure out how to simulate that, right? Is it, okay, these are the 3 or 5 things I need to get done today, plus, a couple rounds in the unit and checking in on this person. Maybe that's what Tuesday's success looks like, and maybe Wednesday's success is a little bit different. But I think that's the hard thing. And none of the problems are usually solved in a day. So also having that really taking the long view on it. Yeah. Again, kind of the horizon point, right? Of like, okay, here we, step by step, we're getting there, and holding on to those things.
I could see, I had never thought about that before, because I'm also such a task oriented. Like we just actually bought a house, and so
congrats.
Thank you. But just thinking about, the tasks that we have to get done, and like, if I can't just get this one thing done, and, it's just like moves into something else, or like you find one problem and then you find another problem, and it just like really bogs you down in somebody that's very task oriented. And I can imagine how difficult that could be, you know, transitioning to a role where it's kind of just this long, you know, consistent like progress, you know, or one step forward, two steps back, kind of like, where are we on this? And it's just like a gradual progression as opposed to like getting things done. Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. And then, you know, just in the current state of nursing, right? Like there are some like big, I think, philosophical questions that we are, you know, encountering as a profession. And so, you know, being engaged in that work, and then, you know, again, just focusing on progress and how are we going to get to where we want to be? How do we sustain this great work that we do? And what does that look like? And I think some of those, you know, really big questions also. And not that it's unique to managers. I think we're all engaged in that, but I think I can only speak for myself, but feel a little bit of a different pressure in some of those questions too, because I do feel incredibly responsible for this team and for the work that we do and for this unit. So kind of carrying the weight of that too. Yeah.
I'm sure there's a whole nother weight underneath getting all of these things done. And it's how is the temperament of the unit, you know, and how is everybody doing, you know, as a nursing whole in our profession, we're all very strained, you know, and you have all of these tasks that you want to get done and goals and things for the unit, but it's a big weight that seems to be getting heavier on a less amount of people. You know?
Precisely.
It's a difficult time, you know?
Yeah.
Are there things that you've learned over the last few years, like pitfalls that you've like learned, you know, tips and tricks for people that may be starting out as nurse management? It's still in this climate that we're in, you know, we're still in COVID.
Yeah. I have this one example that comes to mind. I was like brand new in the interim role, and it was kind of like my first night, like alone as like the leader on the unit. So you knew something was going to happen. Right. So I had this really, I had this really tough conversation with a parent. And I was trying to balance, you know, I had been asked to go in by a nurse who I actually had started with. So it was someone who, you know, was also a friend. And so I really wanted to have her back. And then this parent was escalated and kind of navigating through that. And I think some in that I learned, and I'm grateful I learned this really early on, but kind of going back to that authenticity piece, I think in that conversation, in some ways I was trying to do what I thought the role should do. And I had kind of, I think, lost a little bit perspective of what I, Katie English, thought was there, you know, to do. And so ultimately we, you know, that night was a difficult conversation, but the next day I went back in, touched base with the family again, touched base with the nurse, and ultimately we were able to resolve it, which I was grateful for. But I certainly learned early that, like, to stay true to myself, to stay true to what like my core values, rather than maybe getting caught up in what I thought I should do because of the title, if that makes sense. So that was, I think, one pitfall, is not getting blindsided by the kind of shoulds, but really staying true to who you are, as that's kind of what got you to where you are, right? And so making sure to stay true and honest to that. So
yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I mean, you were put in that position for a reason, because of the work that you and the person that you already are. And
exactly.
So, like, trying to be somebody else or assuming a role. Yeah, I could definitely see how that could be a challenge for a lot of managers. Yeah,
I think especially as you're starting out, because you're like, at least for me, right? It was like, okay, you know, let's show that I've earned this responsibility. But again, it's, you know, not getting caught up kind of in the mask. So
yeah. Do you feel like you've changed the way that you've had difficult conversations for families and staff too? I mean, is that really something that you just try to implement? Just, being yourself and authentic. That's what gets you through those conversations?
I think it does help a lot because, I think it's knowing yourself and like knowing your strengths, right?
Yeah.
So for myself, I know that I'm an empathetic listener, right? Like that's something that I'm able to bring. And so one that also helps me in those conversations because often they just want to be listened to. And so it's kind of a cheap win, but it's also, I think, something that, I'm able to do. So I often say like, play your strengths, and like use those skills because it also is going to be the part that comes more naturally. And so when you're in kind of those high stakes, high stress situations, you're able to be a little bit more rather than trying to be so, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like active or like trying to be a certain way. So that I think can be helpful. But I mean, of course, there's plenty of, really difficult situations and conversations that have to happen. And I certainly don't walk out of all of them feeling stellar, but, again, I think it goes back to that values piece.
Yeah. I'm sure that the more that you are in the role, the more confident you become, in handling those situations. There's difficult conversations that have to be had in all aspects of nursing. I mean, you get a little bit of, you get a lot of experience in the ICU, having difficult conversations with patients and families. And, so I'm sure that just kind of ends up bleeding into, other aspects and then with staff and all of that.
Yeah. But to your point, I mean, certainly they start, at the bedside with bedside nurses, engaging in, first of all, just being in that space all the time. Like that's so much harder. I fully believe I'm happy to go in and have a conversation with a family. Because at the end of the day, I'm not the one in there so if it's better for me to go in and have that conversation, like that's my role, and I'm happy to do that, and support the team that way and to support the family that way. But, in terms of getting us to where we need to be, but having difficult conversations is just like anything else. It takes practice, and it just, the more you do it, it's not that they're ever like, no big deal, but it does get easier the more you practice that skill, like anything else.
Yeah. Are there certain characteristics that you think, if there's somebody that's interested in nurse managing or somebody that's new to nurse managing and they're just, trying to keep their head above water, are there tips or tricks or characteristics that you've found have kind of served you well or that would make a good nurse manager?
Yeah. I think some of the things that come to mind are, for example, being able to, like, you do have to, I think, to be successful in a leadership role, it's well worth your time to do some kind of self work, right? Like you got to know your strengths, know your values. Like it is worth the time to kind of sit with yourself and think through those things. Cause they can be guiding principles, identifying why you're in this work and doing what you're doing. Cause again, on those days, it really does, that's your foundation, right? There's going to be really hard days. And like that, you need to have that foundation in place again, because your team is going to look to you. Right. And we're all in this together, but as that coach, you want to be able to really to lend that how you can. Yeah. So I think those are some of those things. But again, then I think honestly, there's different styles and different ways of doing it. But I think that you have to be, flexible. There's so much that this role is so amorphous. I think that's another thing. Like as things come up, COVID is a perfect example, right? Like overnight, people were having to do things and create practices and policies out of nothing. And so you have to be willing and able to do that. Yeah. And so some of that creativity, and I think just really having that team focus, you don't have to be an extrovert, but you do have to be committed to the team.
Yeah. Yeah.
a couple things that come to mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like the managers that have always stuck out to me are the ones that are so invested. You can tell they're so invested in their team. And you're right. They do feel like a coach. They check in with their nurses and, they guide you where you need to, how you can be better. And, there's a lot of socialization, relationship building. And that goes into that, and like making sure that your team feels heard, and amidst having all of these other responsibilities, I really like the fact that you try and be present in afternoons, having those conversations. I think that's super important, and it makes the nurses feel like heard and that they have a relationship with their managers.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. And the nature of our work is hard. It can be tricky, right? Because no matter what kind of care environment you're in, you are plugged into your patients, you're bouncing around to different rooms, you're doing all these different things. It can be hard. And so I think, I certainly have tried to develop different modalities and ways to connect with team members, because they want to know me just like I want to know them. I think I certainly wanted to know my leaders and my managers, because again, that relationship is just so much stronger when we are that healthy team. Yeah. And so I think those are some of the other unique challenges related to nursing, specifically in terms of team development and keeping leadership not feeling like they're on this other, in this other space, right? It's really important work.
Yeah. You made me think of this one circumstance with one of the managers that he was the manager of the unit for like 30 years and he had just retired. But when I was first starting off on the unit, it was an ICU, and it was my very first code ever. And it was a young guy, and he reminded me of my brother, and it was like the worst. I mean, some codes are going to happen. This one was not, we didn't know that was going to happen. And it was a really ugly code, and he ended up passing away. And it was my first one that I ever had. And I remember I had already been a nurse for 6-7 years, but I was just kind of in a different headspace. And I just remember my nurse manager was like, "Do you want to go on a walk? Do you want to walk with me?" And I was like, I didn't take him up on it, and I wish I had, because I was just trying to I felt very supported by my preceptors and everything. I ended up taking some time to myself, but just the fact that he saw me in that moment, and I was a new nurse on that unit, and that really stuck out to me. It will always, I'll always remember that, and how I really appreciate that.
That human touch, right? That human connection. And I think that's look at nursing, look what we do, right? And that is, whether it's patient care or reaching out to your team member or however, I hope, certainly to foster that as a leader too. Yeah.
Well, your unit is very lucky to have you. And I'm so happy that we could finally do this conversation.
I know. I agree. It's been great to talk, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share some insights and highlights. So
yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I think we're going to wrap it up here. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you again.
That brings us to the end of the show. Thanks for tuning in to Nursing Uncharted. To learn more about today's episode, make sure to explore the show notes at americanmobile.com/nursinguncharted. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a guest. If you're a nurse interested in traveling, visit americanmobile.com to explore the largest database of travel nursing jobs in the industry and the amazing benefits that American Mobile has to offer. Also, a special thanks to producer Jonathan Carey, assistant producers Katie Schraubman and Sam McKay, and Aiden Dykes for the music and editing. Until next time, take care of yourself.